You know what's funny about history class? We always learn about the winners. Caesar conquers Gaul, Alexander marches to India, Napoleon sweeps across Europe. But here's the thing. Some of the most important moments in history happened when these seemingly unstoppable forces got their asses handed to them. Today I want to take you to some forgotten battlefields where empires learned hard lessons. We're talking about sun-scorched deserts in ancient Iran, muddy German forests, and harbors lit up by enemy fire. These weren't just military defeats, they were moments that changed everything. Here's what I've learned studying history. Winners get the headlines, but losers write the textbook for everyone else. When a seemingly invincible army gets crushed, it's not just about one bad day. It forces everyone to rethink how war works, how empires are built, and what's actually possible. The historian John Keegan put it perfectly when he said the study of defeat is really the study of innovation under pressure. Think about it. When everything you thought you knew gets proven wrong on a battlefield, you either adapt or you disappear. Before we dive in, if you're into this kind of deep dive history content, hit that subscribe button and follow us on social media.
And seriously, drop a comment about what historical defeat you think we should cover next. I actually read those, and some of our best episodes have come from your suggestions.
When Rome met reality, Carrhae, 53b. Picture this. You're Marcus Crassus, one of the richest men in Rome, and you've just crossed into what's now Iraq with about 40,000 soldiers. You're expecting to fight the way Romans always fight. March up to their cities, set up siege engines, collect tribute, go home rich. Instead, you find yourself staring across an empty desert at an enemy that won't stand still. The Parthians had a completely different idea about warfare. While Roman legions were built for grinding, face-to-face combat, these guys had perfected hit-and-run tactics with horse archers who could shoot backwards while retreating. And here's the kicker. They had supply camels following behind, so they literally never ran out of arrows. Crassus tries the standard Roman playbook. Form up in a defensive square, wait for them to get tired, then charge. But the Parthians aren't playing that game. They just keep circling, shooting, retreating, reloading. The Romans can't reach them, can't catch them, can't do anything but stand there and take it. Then Crassus's son Publius decides he's had enough of this passive approach. He takes the cavalry and charges. The ancient historian Plutarch tells us exactly what happened. The kid's entire squadron got cut off, surrounded, and butchered. To add insult to injury, the Parthians paraded his severed head in front of the trapped Roman army. That's when the real nightmare began. The desert heat became unbearable, water ran out, and when the heavy Parthian cavalry finally charged in with their lances, the Roman formation just collapsed. It was a complete disaster. Crassus himself was killed, and Rome lost 3 entire legions. But here's why this matters. Rome had gotten lazy about cavalry. They'd been winning battles with infantry for so long, they forgot that different enemies require different tactics. After Carrhae, they completely overhauled their approach to fighting in the east. Sometimes you need to lose spectacularly to learn what you don't know. The forest that swallowed legions, Teutoburg, 9 CE. Now let me tell you about one of the worst days in Roman military history. 3 full legions, that's about 20,000 men, marching through a German forest in the rain, thinking they're on a routine patrol. Their guide is a guy named Arminius, a Germanic chieftain who'd been educated in Rome and served in the Roman army. The Romans trusted him completely, which was their first mistake. What they didn't know was that Arminius had been playing the long game. He'd spent years learning Roman tactics, earning their trust, and secretly organizing Germanic tribes into a unified resistance. And he'd picked the perfect spot for an ambush. Picture a narrow forest path, barely wide enough for the column. It's been raining, so everything's slippery and muddy. The soldiers are strung out in a long line, can't see more than a few yards in any direction because of the trees. Then suddenly, spears start flying out of the undergrowth. But this wasn't just a random attack. Arminius had his people build earthwork barriers at strategic points along the path, turning the whole thing into a killing field. The Romans couldn't form up their usual battle lines, couldn't use their superior discipline and equipment. They were just sitting ducks. The battle lasted 3 days. 3 days of running skirmishes, desperate attempts to build fortified camps, soldiers stumbling through swamps trying to escape. In the end, virtually the entire force was wiped out, including their commander Varus, who killed himself rather than be captured. When news reached Rome, Emperor Augustus was reportedly so devastated he used to walk around his palace shouting, "Varus, give me back my legions!" The defeat was so complete that Rome never seriously tried to conquer Germany again. The Rhine River became the permanent frontier, and that border held for the next 400 years. The perfect trap, Cannae 216 BCE. Let's jump back a bit and talk about what might be the most brilliant tactical defeat in military history. It's 216 BCE, and Rome is fighting Hannibal, the Carthaginian general who famously crossed the Alps with elephants. The Romans show up at Cannae with about 80,000 men, one of the largest armies they'd ever assembled. Their plan was simple: mass all that manpower in the center and just smash straight through Hannibal's smaller force. Brute force tactics had worked before, why not now? At first, it looked like it was working perfectly. The Roman center pushed forward, and the Carthaginian line started bending backward. You can imagine the Roman commanders thinking they had this in the bag. But Hannibal was painting a masterpiece. He'd deliberately put his weakest troops, Gauls and Spanish infantry, right in the center where they'd naturally give ground. Meanwhile, his best soldiers, the African heavy infantry, were on the flanks, just waiting. As the Romans pushed deeper and deeper into what they thought was a collapsing enemy line, those flanks started closing in like the jaws of a trap. Then Hannibal's cavalry, having already routed the Roman horsemen, swung around behind the entire Roman army. Suddenly, 80,000 Roman soldiers found themselves completely surrounded. What happened next was one of the bloodiest single days in ancient warfare. The Roman army was packed so tightly they couldn't even swing their swords properly. Men were suffocating before they could be stabbed. The ancient historian Livy estimated that 50,000 Romans died that day. But here's the fascinating part: Rome didn't give up. Instead of seeking peace, they completely changed their strategy. They realized that trying to beat Hannibal in pitched battles was suicide, so they developed what became known as the Fabian strategy: avoid big battles, cut off supplies, wear down the enemy through attrition. It was a complete reversal of Roman military culture, but it worked. When Athens flew too close to the sun, Syracuse 415–413 BCE. Sometimes the most devastating defeats come from pure overconfidence. Athens in 415 BCE was at the height of its power, master of the seas, head of a vast empire, practically unstoppable. So when they decided to conquer Sicily, it seemed like just another expansion project. They sent the largest expedition in Greek history, over 200 ships, 30,000 men, enough resources to siege any city in the Mediterranean. The target was Syracuse, and honestly, on paper, it should have been a walkover. But Syracuse had help. The Spartans sent a general named Gylippus, who completely transformed the defense. Instead of just sitting behind walls waiting to be starved out, Syracuse went on the offensive, building counterwalls to block Athenian siege works, turning the whole thing into a construction race. Then came the night assault that changed everything. The Athenians tried a surprise attack in the darkness, but without clear communication, it turned into complete chaos. Soldiers couldn't tell friend from enemy, units got separated and started fighting each other, and what should have been a coordinated attack became a panicked retreat. The naval battle in the Great Harbor was even worse. Syracuse had stretched chains across the harbor entrance, trapping the Athenian fleet. Then they developed new tactics specifically designed to counter Athenian advantages: grappling hooks and heavy marines to turn sleek warships into floating brawls. The retreat was a nightmare. Thousands of Athenians tried to march overland, but they were harassed every step of the way. When they finally reached a river, they were so desperate for water that they kept drinking even as their comrades were being slaughtered around them. The historian Thucydides, who lived through this period, called it one of the most catastrophic defeats any Greek state had ever suffered. The defeat at Syracuse didn't just cost Athens an army, it shattered their empire and exposed them to their enemies. It was the beginning of the end of Athenian dominance, all because they thought they could take on anyone, anywhere, anytime. Fire on the water, Red Cliffs, 208 C.E. Let's head to ancient China for a moment, where one of history's great naval disasters was about to unfold. Cao Cao, who controlled northern China, was trying to reunify the country under his rule. He'd assembled a massive fleet on the Yangtze River and was feeling pretty confident about his chances. His engineers had what seemed like a brilliant idea: chain all the ships together to create a stable platform. No more seasickness, better coordination, a floating fortress that could transport his northern army safely across the water. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. The southern commanders, led by Zhou Yu, realized that all those chained-together ships weren't a fortress. They were kindling, waiting for a match. So they came up with one of the most audacious plans in military history. They loaded up some old ships with flammable materials, set them on fire, and sent them drifting toward Cao Cao's fleet. The wind was blowing in just the right direction, and when those fire ships hit the chained fleet, the whole thing went up like a bonfire. Soldiers who were already sick from river diseases and cramped conditions panicked. They couldn't separate the ships, couldn't maneuver, couldn't do anything but watch the fire spread from vessel to vessel. It was a complete disaster. This defeat had huge consequences for Chinese history. Instead of reunification under Cao Cao, China split into 3 separate kingdoms, each developing its own approach to governance and culture. The failure at Red Cliffs didn't just sink ships, it changed the entire trajectory of one of the world's great civilizations. The last stand that echoed through history. Thermopylae, 480 BCE. Finally, let's talk about probably the most famous defeat in military history. Everyone knows the story of the 300 Spartans, but let me tell you why this loss was actually more important than most victories. King Leonidas and his small force weren't trying to win a conventional battle.
Prepare for glory! This is Sparta!
They were buying time. The narrow pass at Thermopylae was like a funnel. It didn't matter if Xerxes had 1,000,000 men if only a few hundred could fight at once. For 2 days, it worked perfectly. Wave after wave of Persian attacks broke against the Greek shield wall. Even the famous immortals, Xerxes' elite troops, couldn't break through. The Greeks had turned geography into their greatest weapon, but geography cuts both ways. A local shepherd showed the Persians a mountain path that led behind the Greek position. Once Leonidas realized he was about to be surrounded, he made a calculated decision. Send most of his allies away to fight another day, but stay with a small corps to slow down the Persian advance as long as possible. The last stand was brutal. The Spartans and their allies fought until they were completely overwhelmed, selling their lives for every hour of delay they could provide. But those hours mattered. The time they bought allowed the Greek fleet to reposition and the Greek city-states to coordinate their response. The defeat at Thermopylae became the story that rallied the entire Greek world. It proved that Persian numbers weren't invincible, that ordinary Greeks could stand up to the greatest empire on earth. The psychological impact of that last stand was worth more than any tactical victory. Here's the thing about all these defeats: they weren't just bad days for the losing side. They were moments when the entire understanding of warfare, strategy, and empire had to be reconsidered. Rome learned that different enemies require different tactics. They couldn't just rely on the same playbook everywhere. The Germans showed that local knowledge and guerrilla tactics could defeat the world's most professional army. The Greeks proved that overconfidence was its own worst enemy. The Chinese discovered that clever engineering without strategic thinking was just expensive kindling. And sometimes, a heroic defeat could inspire resistance better than any victory. These aren't consolation prizes or footnotes to real history. These are the moments when the future got rewritten, when empires learned their limits, and when new possibilities opened up. If you want more stories like these, The moments that changed everything but didn't make the highlight reel. Make sure you're subscribed and following us on all platforms. Trust me, we're just getting started.